Today we're going to talk about math. Yeah, math. But math in the kitchen means we get to eat. So there's lots of places to start, and the easiest place to begin is with measuring spoons, which is that and that. There's other ones, of course. Then into measuring cups of two kinds, and then also ingredients. So we'll use the measuring spoons, the measuring cups, and the measuring cup for most of our ingredients, but sometimes the ingredient comes already measured for us. And in this case, these little lines, even though it's not wrapped perfectly, those little lines indicate a tablespoon. Now, the other thing that I use is a scale. And one of the reasons I use a scale is because it is more accurate than using measuring cups. And so one of the reasons that's the case, and this is just information, when you go to measure flour and you push the cup in the flour, sometimes you pack more in, so it's still a cup, but sometimes it might weigh more for making cookies at home or muffins at home, pancakes, waffles. None of that really matters because it's just such a little amount. When you are at a big bakery and you're using 40, 50 pounds of flour, well, that's a whole lot of cups. Nobody wants to measure all that, so we weigh things for speed and for accuracy, and so that's somewhere down the line. So for now, what we're going to do is do a quick little talk about how much that equals that, or the other way around. So a teaspoon, which is what the small one is, the big one is called a tablespoon. There are 3 of these and 1 of these. This is a quarter of a cup, which means there are 4 of these and 1 of these. Now, as hard as it sounds like it is to believe, this and this have a connection. So these kinds of cups are used for dry measuring. When I measure flour, when I measure sugar, dry milk powder, cocoa, chopped almonds, whatever we have. This is a liquid measure, and the reason and how we know by looking is this one, the lines go up the side, but the measure stops before the top. So we're going to use this one for liquids. So, and the reason would be so when we're walking around with it, we're not spilling it all over the place. No one wants to make a mess. Got to clean up a mess. In either case, the same thing applies. So 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. 4 tablespoons is 1/4 of a cup. So that means 16 of these is 1 of these. That's a lot of information. I don't expect to remember all that. There's not going to be a quiz, but it's to show you that all this does work up to making things the same. One more real quick piece of information. 2 of these also is 1 ounce, or 16 makes 1 cup here, which turns into quarts and then in gallons. So all this stuff adds up to making the bigger thing. Kind of like how pennies turn into nickels and dimes and quarters, into dollars, into tens of dollars, or hundreds of dollars. When we get into a gallon, we've got 128 ounces, or 256 of these things. Well, no one wants to measure 256 of these, so we'll just use a gallon. So, enough of the introductory part. I'm going to use these measuring tools to measure the ingredients for blueberry muffins. Yeah. And then we're going to bake some off. We'll take a look at them. I will eat them. You will not. But your homework, yes, math comes with homework. Your homework is going to be make this recipe on the weekend so you have something yummy to eat for it. So 2 things. You can make the ingredient parts separate, and on Saturday or Sunday morning mix them all together and bake them and have yummy muffins for brunch. or just make them and eat them whenever you get around to it. It's up to Mom to decide, or Dad. So I'm going to take a pause and get organized with all of my stuff, all of my ingredients, and we're going to measure it, and we're going to mix it, and we're going to put them into the tins, and then we're going to bake them. And that's going to be some math, and because we're going to add, and we're going to do these things, we're going to learn how to use the tools, some math, and some yummy treats. Be back in a second. Hey there. So when we start a recipe, we need first, we're going to read through our recipe. Mine happens to be pretty sloppily written, but that's my notes for my recipe. It's actually in a cookbook that I've got, but I took it out, wrote it down so I have it to work with. One of the things we want to do is always read through your recipe first to see what the steps are that you have to start and use to finish your recipe. This particular recipe requires melting some butter. So I need to do the things that take the longest and require the oven or stove first. So I have a small saucepan, and it's going to take 4 ounces of butter. And now I know that for a couple of reasons. One, because I know that, but also because on the package right there, it tells me that it's 4 ounces. My recipe says I need 4 ounces and a tablespoon. Well, remember, we just talked about the markings on the outside of the package indicating a tablespoon. So we're going to go for a little bit of a ride here. Bend, bend, bend. And so marking one line, I'm going to cut right down through, making sure not to cut me because that's not good. All right, so 1 extra tablespoon goes into the pot now. The pot's going to go onto the stove on low heat. What I want is the butter to be melted but not to be boiling hot, because then I have to wait for it to cool down. The reason I want the butter melted, let's go for a little bit of a ride up. The difference between muffins and cakes is a pretty important distinction to make, because the mixing is far, far less for a muffin, which is why it's a lot easier for young cooks to make. Now, cakes are also worth learning to make, but let's start with muffins now. I'm going to melt the butter, then I'm going to add to that the sugar, and then an egg, which is right there, and then all the other things which I'm going to measure, and I'm going to show you how I do all that and show how we put the muffin batter together. And the most important thing is to not overmix. And you'll read recipes that say don't overmix it, but it doesn't really say what does it mean to overmix and how do you know and what happens. Well, the world won't come to an end, but what happens when you overmix anything that has flour into it, you risk changing the texture from the beautiful thing it's supposed to be to sometimes it's still edible, it's not poison, but it maybe not be as spectacular as it could be. So undermixing, certainly in the case of muffins, learning how to mix just right or mixing a little bit less is probably better than overmixing, because then they come out tough, and that's a thing that you'll learn about later. But anyway, so I'm going to mix, no, I'm going to melt, then I'm going to mix, but right now, I'm going to get this on the stove, and behind me, I've got that little teeny orange pan that has a mix of butter and flour I'm going to use to brush into the muffin tins. I'm not a particularly big fan of papers on muffins. I just don't like them. So I'm going to use my own homemade pan release spread, which is butter and flour mixed together and melted. I'm going to brush it inside the tins, put the muffin batter inside, and then in the oven it's going to go. So I'll be back in a minute and we'll start measuring. Hello again. All right, so that was really quick, but it really wasn't. The butter's melted, hard to see. Anyway, it is. Let's see if we can tip forward. Tip. Yay. All right, well, that wasn't a great view, but it's melted. So muffins are going to be two main categories of things. They're going to be the wet stuff, which is going to be including the sugar, which doesn't sound like a wet thing, but when it comes to muffins, muffins sorry, when it comes to muffins, sugar is a wet thing. And for my recipe, I need a half a cup of sugar. So the way that we do, I have lots of mixing bowls when I move stuff around. All right, so the way we're going to measure half a cup of sugar is very simple. We're going to go for a small ride. There we go. All right, so I have a little scoop I use sometimes when I want small amounts. That's what that is. So measuring cup goes in, pull it up, and then shake it a little bit to make it even. I use a little flat-sided spatula to run across the top to make sure that it's even across the top and not mounding. I don't want mounding, I want nice and flat, and that's going to go into this big bowl, and then into that big bowl is going to go my butter, but I'm getting, eek, sorry, didn't plan. There we go. Into the bowl with the sugar goes the butter. There's the butter. And scraping down the sides. So using a rubber spatula. Some people call them bowl scrapers. Some people are very, very serious about the names of the tools for their kitchen things. That's not quite that important to me. Clang, clang, clang. Everything's making noise. So the last thing that's going to go in, and I'm going to wait on adding it, but the last thing in the wet part is going to be the egg. So I'm going to crack the egg into my bowl. I'm going to hang on to that for just a second, and that's going to go into this one for a mess, and way over there. All right, so the liquid stuff is mostly ready. Now, one of the things I forgot to get, and I'm going to get in a minute, is some vanilla. Liquid vanilla extract is a nice flavor addition, just a little bit, to give the muffin or the cake or whatever you're using it in, to give it a little bit more depth of flavor. So when you are eating it, sometimes you get the first flavor, and then after that you get some more flavors. That's one of the ways cooks and bakers build layers of flavors in the things that they're making, and then the people with them say, wow, how did you do that? Yeah, you know, then that's where you're all modest and say, psh, something I just threw together. We know better, but that's okay. So now, bowl for flour. Now sometimes, especially on cakes, I would sift the flour. For the muffin, I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is move things around, and the flour comes over. Now, flour, we just remember a minute ago we talked about taking the cup and really cramming it in there. Well, I don't want to really do that. What I want to do is keep my little spatula handy. Now, you can use a serving spoon, or if you've got a little flour scoop, that's fine. What I'm trying to do is not pack the flour in so much that I'm getting more really than I want. So I know generally a cup of all-purpose flour is going to weigh 5 ounces, but if I really cram it in there, it might be 5.5. Well, if I do that twice and then do that with a half a cup, I've got over an extra ounce of flour that the liquid has to absorb, and maybe it can't do all that. Maybe it's more than it can absorb. So we want to try to keep the ratio, the quantities right. So I'm going to fill it past the top, then take this little thing, and you can use the back of a table knife if you've got one of those, something that's safe. So 1, we're going to go 2.5. So I've lost, here it is, there's my half. I have stuff everywhere. Sometimes that happens when you're cooking and baking, especially when you're making a video. You have things all over the place. So there's 1, here is 2. Measuring can be loud sometimes. And then I almost went backwards, and then 2.5. All right, so now, good and even. There we go. Clang. 2.5. I made a boo-boo. 2.25 cups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in because it's already filled and take a 1/4 cup out. Now, this is that math part we talked about earlier. I mismeasured and used 2.5 cups when I really needed 2.25 cups. And I'm looking at my recipe down there. So if I follow my measurements, take out the difference. So imagine it's like paying for a soda. Say the soda is $2.50 and all you have is 2 singles and a 50-cent piece. Well, you give that to the clerk and the clerk's going to give you back 25 cents. It's kind of what just happened here. Took back 1/4 of 1 cup of flour and now we're good to go here. So now into my bowl of flour I need 2 tablespoons of baking powder and 1, sorry, I said the wrong thing, 2 teaspoons, big difference, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Soda and powder are not the same thing, and we'll talk about that at another time. It's a bit more chemistry than we need for just this particular episode, but chemistry and baking definitely go hand in hand. So what I do, similar idea to using this with a cup, but it comes with the convenient little edge on this particular can. So the spoon goes in and just scrape it clean. So baking powder. It's always good to double and triple check just to make sure. Once it's in, it's very hard to come out. So 1, 2 of those. And since this is mostly very, very clean, I personally don't have any issues with going from the baking powder to the baking soda. And I need 1 teaspoon of the soda. And same idea, this particular box has the little straight edge. I use that like my little spreader, and bing. Both of these things are going to give the muffin that nice big rise. The big difference is baking powder is activated by the heat of the oven. Baking soda is activated by the heat of the oven, but also when you add something that's acid to it. And maybe you've done that really cool science experiment where you put in a bottle or test tube a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of baking soda, and then just boom, watch it blow a cork off of the bottle. Well, buttermilk actually is acidic. Not as acidic as vinegar, but the chemical reaction is going to be the same. We're going to use the buttermilk has flavor, which is why we want it in baking, but the acid part and the baking soda part is alkaline. Those two things together have a chemical reaction which give us the rise on our muffins, but the buttermilk also makes the muffin taste good. That's what the butter does too. All right, so enough of that. Let's on to our salt. So we need 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Well, this is 1/2 of a teaspoon, which is not what I wanted. All right, I have lots of them, so this is 1/4. I have this kind too, so I'm going to dip into my little salt well and look for, so this is a full 1/4 of a teaspoon. That's too much salt. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So I'm going to do 1/2, eyeball that, and it goes. Salt is an important ingredient in baking. One, because it brings out the flavors of things, but also it interacts in a chemical way with the other ingredients there and helps do things inside. We'll talk about that another time. So flour, baking powder, baking soda, salt, sugar, butter, egg, and then the blueberries. But before we get to the blueberry part, that's going to be the last step because we're going to do something interesting to the blueberries to help them stay inside the whole muffin instead of just whoop, settling down at the bottom, because that's no fun. The person who doesn't get the crown doesn't get any blueberries. So here is my butter and sugar mixed together, and it looks kind of all funky looking. I'm going to do a tip down, and you can see it's kind of all, doesn't look really brought together, does it? So in goes, bloop, in goes the egg. Now I'm going to just take a step back over there and grab a whisk. And one of the things that's going to happen, and the main thing I want to have happen, is the egg yolk has an ingredient in it. I was going to turn a little bit, didn't work. An ingredient in it that's going to help pull everything together. And as we whisk this a little bit, now we see, instead of being, it's still sloshy a little bit, but instead of being a mix, a messed up stuff, I'm going to go for a bit of a ride. Now we look at it, and it has kind of a velvety shine to it, almost a, well, it doesn't sound good when we say plasticity, but it's got a smoothness to it, and that's the thing we're looking for. The last element is going to be 1 cup of buttermilk. That one's fine. So this is a 2-cup measure, so I'm going to sit close to it. I'm going to try to get as close as I can this way so that I'm looking even with the line for the measure that I want. Because sometimes when you look down, you don't get the right amount of measure, and then you hang on, I'm going to do a little shaky, and oh yeah, big difference. So now, very good. So that's going to go in, and also use the spatula to get the bits out. So trade, whisk out. This is actually going into the sink because it will fall and make a mess. Now here is the thing. Mixing our muffin mix, we're going to take the dry stuff, put it on top of the wet stuff. Now we're not going to overmix. Now what does that mean? Well, we're going to fold. Let me see if I can give you a bit of a, this is as much as we do. Alright, so we're going to just take our tool and just like this. And before I finish this, I'm going to add 1 cup worth of blueberries. I'm going to 1 cup of blueberries into the bowl and a little bit of flour on top, and mix that around a little bit. The flour, these blueberries are frozen, but they're going to thaw in time. The flour is going to grab on to the muffin batter, and it won't fall in. And now, in they go. And the little teeny bit of flour that's on the muffins isn't going to be a problem. And now we can see, just by doing that a few times, the big difference in what we ended up with. So now the liquid buttermilk, the sugar draws water in, so that's why it's in with the liquid part. The egg, the butter, which will absorb some of the flour, and the buttermilk have absorbed the dry part, and they're holding on to blueberries. Now it is time to paint our muffin tins with the pan release spray, then use our portioner, and we're going to scoop and get them in the oven. Alright, so we have our pan release and our pastry brush, and it's just brushing inside. I've already done these, but that's how you just inside, 1 little coat. That's all that you need for that. And now we take our scooper and a nice well-rounded scoop into the tin and do that again and do all these. But what I like to do on top of muffins, because it looks nice and it adds a nice crunch, is do either a, it's called, get off of there. It's called sanding sugar, or sometimes big sprinkles like this. And you can see they're pretty big pieces. And so I'm going to put some of that on top of the muffins. Sometimes I like to make a streusel topping. Streusel topping is flour, sugar, and butter together. You can add pecans, you could add walnuts, you could add oats, you could add all kinds of things into it. It browns up very pretty on top of the muffin, on top of coffee cakes, on top of pound cakes. There's lots of ways to use a streusel, but it looks nice and it tastes good, and sometimes you can make complementary flavors. Maybe make a streusel with lemon zest, so the blueberry and lemon, there's just a little hint of that, and it tastes good. So I'm going to fill these up, and before I put them in the oven, we'll be back to take a look at what they look like, and then we're going to bake. Alright, so now we are all set to go. Both of them are pan up, ready to go, and into hot oven they go. So what does a hot oven mean? Well, all ovens are hot. Well, yeah, more or less. I'm starting these at 375 degrees. I'm going to give them 1 minute, and then I'm going to turn it down to 350 degrees so they can finish baking. That initial extra 25 temperature degrees is going to give it a little bit more of a push, and plus when I lower it, that still will keep some of that high heat there, and that helps with the chemical reaction between the baking soda, baking powder, buttermilk, and just the mixing of the dough, of the batter in general. Just boom. So we get a nice crowned muffin, and it looks good. So about 12, 13, 14 minutes, we're looking for a nice golden brown yumminess on top, and that's kind of our clue when it's done. If we need to be sure, we can use a wooden skewer or a toothpick or a cake tester just to make sure the cake part, the muffin part, is baked. If you touch a blueberry, of course, it's going to come out all squishy. That's not going to bake. That's just going to get turned into yum and purple. They're done! So I've taken a few out, but you can see they have beautiful golden color all the way around. And on this one, there's some blueberries on top, which means that the flour did what it was supposed to do and held the blueberries inside the muffin. I'm using this little guy again, and just if I need to, working in the side just to see where sometimes the brush may miss a spot of the pan release. But that one actually, that was sticking because of the blueberry on the side. So that's not enough pan release on the planet to fix that problem. So these are coming out really nice. Normally, what you want to do is let your baked good rest in the pan on a cooling rack, so that the air goes all the way around it. Even if it's just a little bit above the counter, it still gives a chance for the heat to dissipate evenly away from everything. And 3, 4, 5 minutes, depending on the thing. And muffins were a couple of minutes. Cakes, I would go a little longer. But you definitely want to get to the point where they can come out of the pan so that the rest of the moisture in there comes out of the cake or the muffin. And then you don't have soggy baked goods, because nobody wants that. Soggy baked goods, yuck. These you can still eat while they're still warm, and that's actually sort of kind of preferred. The butter melts oh so nicely on the inside. And let's take a look inside this one. So one of the things we're looking for, this one's going to pull apart real nicely. But now this has lots of blueberries inside, but if you look at the texture, you see all of those nice, small, uniform holes. We talked before about the danger of overmixing. Danger, danger. Well, the danger is that you develop that protein inside called gluten, and gluten, gluten gets tough like rubber bands, and it doesn't really undo. When you just, it doesn't undo. It doesn't come undone. What over-mixed muffins look like is when you tear them open, instead of having all these beautiful, small, little even holes, you'll have up and down holes. That's called tunneling, like a tunnel, except it goes up and down. And that is a sign that the muffin has been overmixed. It still tastes fine. You can still eat it warm with butter, eat it the next day, put it in the, well, don't put it in the microwave, put it in the oven, heat it up. You could even take it and heat it up on a pan on the stovetop a little bit. That will warm it up. I would avoid microwave for all baked goods all the time, always and forever. They are not friends. So that's the reason we're working toward undermixing. When you are undermixing your muffin batter or pancake batter in the bowl, you think, well, I still have lumps. Don't forget that the act, I'm going to pretend, the act of scooping is that last moment of stirring. So if you're using the scooper that I did, you scoop in and squeeze it out, or they have the other kind with the thumb like they used to use for ice cream scoops, or this, and you use a little rubber spatula or this thing to get it out. All of that activity on the batter is still mixing, so you still have some mixing to do, but you're better off with a little bit undermixed and letting it rest for a minute, and then doing the scooping and portioning and baking, because then you get loveliness like this. And well, that's just fun. So this is the fun with math. A little bit of quarter cups and half a cups, and before you know it, you've got a muffin. We can do pancakes, we can do waffles, we can do banana bread. Lots of fun things to be done. So go make some muffins and have fun.